You think you need more excitement. Something new. Something different. Something that breaks the flatness of your day. That's what it feels like. That's the explanation that makes sense on the surface. Life has become steady. Predictable. Nothing is falling apart. Nothing urgent is pulling you in 10 different directions. There is space now. Room to breathe. And yet, something inside you doesn't feel fully alive. You sit in that feeling. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just, slightly underwhelming. Like something is missing that you can't quite name. You scroll. You check something. You open an app without thinking about why. Close it again. Then open something else. Small movements. Almost automatic. Not because you need anything. Because you're trying to feel something. You lean back. Exhale. Try to settle into the moment the way you imagine you should. But it doesn't land. Not fully. There's a thin layer of restlessness underneath the calm. Not anxiety. Not stress. Something more precise. A lack of activation. You look around the room. Everything is in place. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs fixing. And that's exactly where the discomfort begins. Because nothing is asking anything from you. There's no pressure. No decision. No problem to solve. And without that, your system starts searching. Not for chaos. For something that feels like engagement. A thought appears. Maybe I should do something. It sounds reasonable. Productive. Normal. But underneath it, there's something else. A subtle pull toward stimulation. Toward intensity. Not big intensity. Just enough. Enough to feel something sharper than this. You reach for your phone again. This time slower. More aware. You unlock it. Scroll. Pause on something that slightly pulls your attention. Not interesting enough to matter. Just enough to shift your state. You feel it. That small change. That tiny spike. And for a second, you feel more present. More awake. More engaged. Then it fades. And the quiet returns. Unchanged. You lock the screen. Put it down. And now you can see it. Clearer than before. You weren't trying to find something important. You were trying to feel something that isn't here. You sit there longer. Letting that land. Because it doesn't feel dramatic. But it feels accurate. You don't actually want chaos. You don't want your life to fall apart. You don't want problems. You don't want instability. But there is something you miss. And it's not what you thought. You lean forward slightly. Elbows on your knees. And the realization begins to sharpen. You don't miss chaos. You miss the intensity that came with it. That sentence lands clean. Because now everything starts to make sense. There was a time when your life felt louder. More urgent. More activated. Not necessarily better. But more alive. Your attention was pulled constantly. Your system was engaged. There was always something happening. Something to respond to. Something to think about. Something to feel. And inside that, you felt clear. Sharp. Present. You knew what mattered. You knew where to focus. You didn't have to search for engagement. It was already there. But now, that intensity is gone. And what's left feels quieter. Softer. Less defined. And instead of recognizing that as peace, you interpret it as absence. You sit back slowly. And the truth becomes harder to ignore. You're not looking for something new. You're trying to recreate a feeling you used to have. A feeling of sharpness. Of engagement. Of emotional activation. Of being fully pulled into something. And when life doesn't give you that, you start to create it. Subtly. Quietly. Without realizing it. You check something unnecessary. You revisit something that slightly bothers you. You think about a conversation that had a little tension in it. You replay a moment that wasn't fully resolved. Not because it matters. Because it gives you something to feel. And that feeling, even if it's not positive, feels closer to alive than this quiet space. You sit there longer. The room still. The light steady. And now the pattern is impossible to ignore. You're not chasing chaos. You're chasing the feeling that chaos used to give you. You exhale slowly. And the final realization of this moment settles in. You don't actually need more excitement. You've just learned to associate intensity with being alive. And without it, this calm moment doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something is missing. Even when nothing is. By midday, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Not because anything dramatic happens. Because nothing does. And that nothing starts to feel louder than it should. You move through the day normally. Small tasks. Simple actions. Things that don't require much from you. And for the first time, you're aware of something underneath them. Not the task. Not the movement. The absence of something that used to be there. You rinse a glass. Set it down. Dry your hands. And in the space between those actions, you feel it again. That slight drop. That quiet flattening. Not sadness. Not boredom. Just a lack of edge. You pause. Not because you decided to. Because something in you is noticing, this is the moment where I usually reach for something. And now you can see it more clearly. This isn't random. This is learned. You didn't just go through intense periods in your life. You adapted to them. You learned how to function inside them. How to stay sharp. How to stay alert. How to stay engaged. Your attention became faster. Your reactions became quicker. Your awareness became more focused. And inside that state, you felt something very specific. You felt alive. Not calm. Not peaceful. Alive. There was contrast. Movement. Uncertainty. Things changing. Things pulling you in. And your system learned something from that. Not consciously. Not intentionally. But consistently. It learned, this is what it feels like to be present. You sit down slowly. Lean forward slightly. And now the mechanism becomes clearer. Your system doesn't just remember intensity. It expects it. Not in a dramatic way. In small, quiet ways that shape how you move through normal moments. You don't notice it when life is active. Because the environment is feeding that expectation. But when life becomes steady, that expectation doesn't disappear. It stays. And now there's a gap. Between what your system expects, and what the moment is giving you. And that gap feels like something is missing. You stand. Walk into another room. Pick something up. Put it down. The movement is small. Almost meaningless. But it does something. It changes your state slightly. Just enough. And that's when the realization sharpens. You're not reacting to chaos. You're recreating intensity. That sentence lands differently. Because it explains the subtle behaviors. The unnecessary checks. The small distractions. The moments where you pull yourself slightly out of calm. Not because calm is wrong. Because it isn't activating enough. You sit there longer. And now you can trace it deeper. You don't just want something to do. You want something to feel. Something with contrast. Something that pulls you out of this flat baseline and into a sharper state. You think about how often that happens. You revisit a message that had a little tension. Not a problem. Just enough friction. You read it again. Feel that slight shift in your chest. That small activation. And for a moment, you feel more present. More aware. More engaged. And then it fades. You lean back slowly. And now the pattern is undeniable. You don't seek chaos. You seek the feeling that chaos once gave you. And your system has become efficient at recreating it. Not through big events. Through micro adjustments. Tiny shifts in attention. Small behaviors that add just enough stimulation to break the flatness. You don't even think about it. It just happens. Because your baseline has changed. You've spent enough time and intensity that calm now feels like a reduction. Not because it is empty. Because it is quieter. You lean forward again. Elbows on your knees. And the sharpest layer surfaces. You didn't just experience intensity. You built your sense of aliveness around it. That sentence should land hard. Because now this is no longer about preference. It's about identity. Intensity didn't just pass through your life. It shaped how you recognize being alive. Fast thoughts. Strong emotions. Clear reactions. Defined focus. That became your reference point. And anything below that feels like less. Even when it's not. You sit there longer. Letting that settle. Because now something important becomes visible. Calm isn't lacking. It's just not matching the level of activation your system has learned to expect. That distinction matters. Because it removes the illusion that something is wrong with your life. Nothing is missing. Nothing is broken. Nothing needs to be added. What's happening is simpler. And deeper. You're experiencing a quieter form of life, through a system that has been trained to recognize only the loud one. You exhale slowly. And the final realization of this moment settles in. You're not restless because life is empty. You're restless because your definition of alive has been shaped by intensity. And now, without it, this moment feels like less. Even when it isn't. Evening is where it becomes undeniable. The day can still carry you. Small things. Tasks. Distractions. Enough movement to keep you slightly ahead of yourself. But evening removes that. It doesn't take anything from you. It just stops giving. The room quiets. The light softens. There's no urgency left in the air. Nothing waiting for you. Nothing pulling you forward. And suddenly, you're left with the moment as it actually is. Still. Open. Undemanding. You sit down. Hands resting loosely. Body relaxed. And for a moment, everything looks exactly the way you thought you wanted. Calm. Peaceful. Stable. But inside that calm, something feels off. Not wrong. Just, not enough. You shift slightly. Adjust your posture. Let your shoulders drop. Try to settle deeper into the chair. But something inside you doesn't follow. Not because you're tense. Because nothing is activating you. That's when it becomes clear. You don't just feel less engaged. You feel less, there. You lean forward slightly. Elbows on your knees. And your mind begins to move. Not toward anything important. Just searching. Looking for something to hold on to. Something to react to. Something that gives the moment shape. A thought appears. Maybe I should check something. It doesn't matter what. The content is irrelevant. What matters, is the shift. You reach for your phone. Unlock it. Scroll. Pause on something. Feel that small change. That tiny spike. And for a second, you feel more present. More awake. More, yourself. Then it fades. And the quiet returns. Unchanged. You lock the screen. Put it down. And now, you can't unsee it. You don't feel alive unless something is pulling you. That sentence lands deeper than expected. Because it's not dramatic. It's precise. When something demands your attention, you show up. Fully. Sharply. Clearly. You know where to look. You know what matters. You know who you are inside that moment. But when nothing is pulling you, your presence thins out. You're still there. Physically. But internally, something is missing. Not emotion. Not thought. Direction. You sit there longer. And the rupture deepens. You've been relying on external pull to feel internally real. That's the structure. That's the pattern. Not chaos. Not drama. Pull. Something that activates you from the outside. Something that creates contrast. Something that gives your attention a target. Without that, you don't collapse. You drift. You lean back slowly. And another layer surfaces. You don't trust calm to hold you. Because calm doesn't give you anything to hold on to. That lands clean. Because now the discomfort makes sense. Calm is not empty. It's just not structured. It doesn't guide you. It doesn't direct you. It doesn't tell you where to place your attention. It just exists. And that kind of moment feels like nothing to a system trained to follow pull. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. Open the fridge. Look inside. Close it again. The movement is automatic. But now you see it clearly. You're not doing something. You're trying to feel something. Trying to create a small shift. A small edge. A small sense of something happening. Because without that, you feel slightly disconnected from the moment you're in. You walk back. Sit again. And now the truth is unavoidable. You don't miss chaos. You miss being pulled into something. That's the rupture. Not loud. Not emotional in an obvious way. But deep. Because it explains everything. Why calm feels flat. Why you create small disturbances. Why you revisit things that don't matter. Why you can't just sit in a moment without reaching for something. You lean forward again. Hands loosely clasped. And the sharpest realization surfaces. You don't feel alive because of what's happening. You feel alive because something is happening to you. That difference matters. Because it removes control. It shows you the dependency. You are not generating aliveness. You are receiving it from external activation. And without that, you don't know how to access it. You sit there longer. The room quiet. The light low. And the emotional layer arrives. Not dramatic. But undeniable. You've spent so long being pulled into life, that you don't know how to enter it on your own. That lands deeper than anything before. Because now, this is no longer about boredom. Or distraction. Or needing more stimulation. It's about something structural. You don't just prefer intensity. You depend on it to feel like you're actually here. You exhale slowly. And the final line of the rupture settles in. You don't feel empty because life is empty. You feel empty because nothing is pulling you into the moment anymore. And without that pull, you're not sure how to stay. After that realization, something shifts. Not in the moment. Not in the room. But in the way you interpret what you're feeling. Because the question is no longer, why does this feel empty? The question becomes more precise. More uncomfortable. More accurate. What have I been calling alive this whole time? You sit back slowly. Let that question stay. Because your first instinct still tries to answer it the old way. Alive means engaged. Focused. Pulled into something. Emotion moving. Thoughts active. Attention sharp. Something happening. That's what you've always recognized as real. And it makes sense. Because that's what your system learned. That's what it was exposed to over and over again. That's what it adapted to. But now, in this quiet moment, that definition begins to feel incomplete. Not wrong. Just narrow. You look around again. Nothing is changing. Nothing is activating you. Nothing is pulling your attention. And yet, something subtle is still here. You just haven't been recognizing it. Because it doesn't arrive the way intensity does. You lean forward slightly. Elbows on your knees. And the truth sharpens. You didn't learn to feel aliveness. You learned to recognize intensity. That sentence lands clean. Because it separates two things you've been treating as the same. Intensity is loud. It spikes. It pulls you in. It gives you contrast. It makes itself obvious. Aliveness doesn't have to do any of that. It doesn't need to spike. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to pull your attention. It's already there. Before anything happens. You sit there longer. Letting that difference settle. Because now, the moment doesn't feel as empty as it did before. Not because it changed. Because you're looking at it differently. You're no longer asking, why doesn't this feel intense? You're starting to ask, what is actually here that I've been missing? That shift matters. Because it removes the expectation. The need for something to happen. The need for something to pull you in. You lean back slowly. And another layer becomes visible. Intensity creates attention. Aliveness exists without needing it. That distinction is everything. Because now, you can see why calm felt empty. Not because it lacked aliveness. Because it lacked noise. It lacked contrast. It lacked the kind of signals your system has learned to follow. And without those signals, you assumed there was nothing there. You stand. Walk slowly toward the window. Look outside. Cars moving. People going somewhere. Everything active. Everything directed. Everything easy to recognize. Because it's loud. Because it's visible. Because it demands attention. And then you look back into the room. Still. Quiet. Nothing moving. Nothing pulling you. And for the first time, you don't interpret that as absence. You see it as something else. Something that doesn't need to announce itself to exist. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And the realization deepens. You've been measuring life based on how strongly it activates you. Not based on whether it's actually there. That lands harder than expected. Because it exposes the mistake clearly. You've been using intensity as a filter. And anything that doesn't pass through that filter, feels like less. Even when it isn't. You lean forward again. Hands loosely clasped. And the sharpest truth surfaces. Calm didn't remove aliveness. It removed the signal you were using to recognize it. That's the twist. Simple. But fundamental. Because now, nothing about the moment needs to change. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to become more engaging. The only thing that needs to shift is what you're looking for. You sit there longer. And something subtle happens. Not dramatic. Not intense. But real. The moment begins to feel less empty. Not because it filled up. Because you stopped expecting it to feel like something else. You notice your breathing. The way your body rests in the chair. The quiet in the room. Not as background. As part of the moment itself. And for the first time, that doesn't feel like nothing. It feels like something you've been moving past too quickly to notice. You lean back slowly. And the final realization of this moment settles in. You didn't need more intensity to feel alive. You just needed to learn how to feel what doesn't announce itself. And that changes everything. The shift doesn't begin with intensity. It doesn't begin with motivation. It doesn't begin with suddenly feeling alive again. It begins somewhere much smaller. Much quieter. In the exact moment you would normally reach for something. And don't. You sit in the same chair. The same room. The same quiet. Nothing has changed. And your system does what it always does. It looks for something to grab onto. Something to engage with. Something that will create a slight edge. A slight pull. A slight sense of direction. The urge appears. Check your phone. Think about something. Replay something. Move. Do anything that changes the state. And this is the moment. Not later. Not when you feel ready. Right here. Where the impulse is still small but already forming. And this time, you notice it. You don't suppress it. You don't fight it. You don't try to become someone who never needs stimulation. You just don't follow it immediately. You stay. At first, that feels like nothing. No reward. No shift. No sudden clarity. Just the same quiet. The same stillness. The same lack of intensity. But underneath that, something unfamiliar starts to appear. A slight discomfort. Not sharp. Not overwhelming. Just unresolved. A feeling of not being pulled into anything. A moment that doesn't tell you where to go next. And this is where you usually leave. Not because something is wrong. Because nothing is happening strongly enough. Now, you stay inside that. That is the work. Not creating a better moment. Not fixing the feeling. Staying in a moment that doesn't activate you. You lean back slightly. Let your body settle. And your mind starts to move again. Of course it does. It offers something. A thought. A direction. A small hook. Something to pull you out of this. And this time, you see it before it becomes action. That matters. Because for a long time, there was no gap. The impulse and the action were the same thing. Now, there is space. A small gap where you can remain. Not perfectly. Not indefinitely. But long enough to see what happens next. You sit there longer. And the discomfort doesn't disappear. It softens. It loses urgency. It stops feeling like something you need to fix immediately. And that's when something subtle shifts. The moment doesn't become intense. It becomes clearer. More defined. Not because something changed. Because you didn't interrupt it. You notice your breathing. Not as a technique. Just as something happening. You notice the quiet. Not as absence. As something present. You notice the way your body rests. The way the room holds. Small things. Quiet things. Things that don't demand attention. But are there. And the longer you stay, the more visible they become. Not dramatic. Not powerful. But real. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. Pour water. Drink. And for once, you don't turn this into the next step. You don't move ahead of the action. You stay inside it. Fully. Without needing it to become something more. And something subtle happens. You don't feel more intense. You feel more, here. That difference matters. Because now, you are not depending on the moment to activate you. You are allowing yourself to remain inside it without being pulled. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And the same quiet returns. But now, it doesn't feel exactly the same. Not because it changed. Because you didn't immediately leave it. You stayed long enough to see what exists without intensity. And that changes the structure. Because now you understand something differently. You don't need to create aliveness. You need to stop interrupting it with the need for something stronger. You lean forward slightly. Elbows on your knees. And another layer settles in. You don't need to remove the urge to seek intensity. You need to stop obeying it every time it appears. That's the shift. Not becoming someone else. Not forcing calm. Not rejecting stimulation. Just, not leaving immediately. You sit there longer. The room quiet. The light steady. And something begins to form. Not excitement. Not intensity. Something quieter. A sense of presence that doesn't need to be activated. And for the first time, that doesn't feel like nothing. It feels like something you've been stepping past too quickly to recognize. The next day doesn't arrive louder. There's no sudden shift. No feeling that something has been fixed. The same light comes through the window. The same quiet sits in the room. The same kind of moments are waiting for you, the way they always have. Nothing about life has changed. And yet, something small has. Not in what you do. In how quickly you reach. You wake up. Sit on the edge of the bed. And for a moment, nothing happens. That moment used to pass without you noticing. Just a gap. A transition. Something to move through. But now, you feel it. Not as something important. As something real. A moment that exists before anything tries to pull you into it. And immediately, the pattern begins. The familiar pull. The quiet instinct to reach for something. To check something. To move towards something that will create a little more feeling. It's still there. That hasn't changed. It doesn't need to. But this time, you don't follow it right away. You stay. Just for a second longer. Then another. And nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. Nothing becomes less clear because you didn't create intensity. The moment holds. You stand. Walk into the kitchen. Fill the kettle. Turn it on. The sound fills the space. Before, this is where you would have left. Reached for your phone. Created movement. Added something. Now, you notice the urge before it becomes action. You feel that pull. That quiet suggestion, this isn't enough yet. And instead of following it, you let it remain. Unresolved. Just for a few seconds longer than you're used. 2. And something subtle happens. The moment doesn't become stronger. It becomes clearer. Not louder. Just, more visible. You hear the sound of the water. Not as background. As something that exists because you are actually here to notice it. You rest your hand lightly on the counter. Not doing anything. Not preparing the next step. Just, remaining. And for the first time, this doesn't feel like something missing. It feels like something you had been moving past too quickly to feel. You pour the water. Sit down. The same chair. The same space. The same quiet. Nothing has changed. And yet, this moment doesn't feel as flat as it did before. Not because it gained intensity. Because you didn't interrupt it. You take a sip. Set the cup down. And your mind begins to move again. Of course it does. It offers something. A thought. A direction. A small hook. Something to pull you out of this. And this time, you don't fight it. You don't push it away. You don't try to become someone who doesn't need stimulation. You simply notice it, and you don't follow it immediately. You stay. That's all. You stay while the pull is still there. And that is new. Because before, the pull and the action were almost the same thing. Now, there is space. A small gap between the urge and the movement. And inside that gap, something begins to take shape. Not excitement. Not intensity. Something quieter. A sense of being here without needing to be activated. You move through the morning. Small moments. Simple actions. Nothing dramatic. And inside those moments, you begin to see it everywhere. The exact point where you used to reach. The exact second where you used to add something. The exact place where you used to feel that something was missing. And now, you pause there. Not every time. Not perfectly. But enough to feel the difference. You notice a quiet moment. No demand. No direction. And for once, you don't try to make it sharper. You let it stay soft. You let it stay quiet. You let it stay, as it is. And something shifts. Not outwardly. Internally. The moment doesn't feel empty. It feels subtle. You sit again later that day. The light softer now. The room familiar. And there is no urgency to move past the moment. No need to create something stronger. No pressure to feel more. Because now, you understand something you didn't before. You weren't missing aliveness. You were only recognizing it when it was loud. That lands quietly. But it changes everything. You lean back slightly. The quiet holding. Not empty. Not flat. Just, there. And for the first time, you are not measuring it against something more intense. You are letting it exist without comparison. You reach for the light. Pause for a second. Not because you're unsure. Because you're aware of the moment itself. And in that brief pause, everything becomes simple. There is nothing missing. There is nothing to add. There is nothing to intensify. This is already part of your life. It always was. You just didn't stay long enough to feel it. You turn off the light. The room goes dark. But nothing feels empty in the darkness. If anything, something feels closer there. Because for the first time, you are not stepping out of the moment as soon as it begins. You are staying. Not waiting for something to pull you. Not needing something to activate you. Just, remaining. And in that staying, something quiet but undeniable finally becomes clear. You don't need intensity to feel alive. You only needed to stop leaving before the moment could show you that you already were.